Hello, I'm Celia Burbery of Auckland Property Management. Today I'd like to share with you some best practices based around what can be a very touchy subject for landlords, and that's if they find themselves with a bad tenant. Firstly, the old adage that prevention is better than cure is definitely relevant when making your initial tenant selection. It is key to dictating the tone of the whole tenancy. Sadly, what we often see is that private landlords are specifically targeted by tenants because they don't have the same screening resources we do when it comes to qualifying tenants. The second point I'd like to make is that landlords can find themselves very surprised at the degree of trouble before they actually realise it's happening. This can happen when what they have had in their property they consider to be a good tenant can suddenly change when they're not looking into a bad tenant. This simply happens because different life events happen with our tenants and their priorities change. It can be a bereavement, or it could be a major change at work, maybe even a change in their employment, and unfortunately their priorities change to be out of their control. So unfortunately we will all know what qualifies as a bad tenant. This usually falls into one of three categories: not paying their rent, abuse of the dwelling itself, or disturbing the peace and quiet enjoyment of neighbouring properties. So we have a problem. Now what to do? So we need to turn to the legislation that governs all landlords and tenants. This will define for you your rights and the processes required to implement those rights when giving notice to your tenant. I'm going to presume that you've done your preliminary work. Either a 14-day notice or a remedy of breach has already been served to your tenant, and you are now wanting your tenant to receive their final notice. Firstly, one of the most common notice periods to provide your tenants is with a 90-day notice. This actually requires no reason by the landlord to serve a 90-day notice, and trust me, it was definitely wise not to provide any reason for the tenants to attempt to challenge. Secondly, and used more widely, would be the 42 days notice to vacate a property. One reason for this is if an owner or family member wishes to reoccupy the property themselves. But take note that trusts or companies cannot use this notice period, as trusts and companies do not have family members. 42-day notice also is relevant if you wish to house employees, and 42 days notice must be given if the property is sold and requires vacant possession of a periodic tenancy. This does not apply to a fixed term tenancy, as the sale of a property does not end a fixed term tenancy. I'd like to highlight 2 points that are worthy to remember during this notice period. Firstly, that if a landlord has given a 90 or 42-day notice to their tenant, at any point during those timeframes, a tenant can provide a counter notice of 21 days notice at any time. Also, once notice has been served by either the tenant or the landlord, it's not a matter of simply changing your mind, as this is a legal binding contract. You will be required to gain the written consent of the other party before that notice can be withdrawn. It's important to remember that in addition to the notice periods, you must allow for your method of service, which starts the following day. These are: if you personally deliver your notice, allow 1 extra day. If you affix to the door or place in the letterbox of the tenant your notice, allow 2 extra days for delivery. If you use ordinary mail to their letterbox, you are required to allow 4 extra days. Fax or email, if sent before 5 o'clock on any working day, you have to allow 1 extra working day for delivery. So, for example, if you are delivering a 42-day notice to your tenant and delivering it by hand in person, this will actually have to allow for 43 days. Which is 42 days notice and 1 day for delivery. Most tenants, upon receiving a notice to vacate, will start looking immediately for a replacement property. But should you find yourself with tenants who refuse to move, and this does happen, that will require an application to the Tenancy Tribunal for possession of your property. This may go on to include the use of a bailiff and a complete changing of locks, but that's an eviction process and that's another story. I hope this information on the requirements around terminating a tenancy has been helpful to you should you find yourself in the position of having a bad tenant. Here at Auckland Property Management, we help many landlords with this situation and are more than happy to discuss with you how our expertise can manage this for you. Until next time, take care.